Tetris, cat,
Cats, yeah.
snake,
Antics.
yes, very antique game.
Yeah.
Very antique games. Yeah.
We have at my organization, we have one project on ancient history of digital, including games and computers and narratives developed around it. And we have 2 PhD students doing research with the University of Colorado. It's very interesting to see how little, in a way, has changed in some way, while we have many other changes.
Well, I have a bit of history on my table. So I'm in the office right now. So a bit of history on my table. If you can see, it's right here.
That's it. Is it AT or XT?
It's Olivetti, so it's in between of XT and AT. It's Olivetti M24, and actually I got it as a gift for my birthday because it's exactly the same, or very same computer which was infected, where I turned to the computer virus research and cybersecurity. That was exactly almost the same computer. So actually I had a gift with this computer. Actually, it is infected with the same virus. So this floppy disk is infected with the same computer virus.
Il est 7h30. Il est 8h30 en Europe.
Great intro, Eugene. You really provide us with the historical context. Now we have to see what will happen, what is happening now and what will happen in future, as Churchill used to say.
I think my first computer was an Atari 800 with a cassette tape drive that was hard for it to get any viruses back then. It wasn't popular enough.
Christopher and Eugene, I am worried that we are revealing our age with this information. You know.
Too late on that one, I think.
Do you remember what's this?
Oh, those are cards for the. Oh my God, that's.
I took a class at Johns Hopkins learning how to program on those in Fortran and then Lisp.
Eugene, it is 82, 83?
80s.
80s.
Do you remember this?
Of course. Let me see if I have something.
Okay, I have some funny stuff here.
I highly recommend everyone goes to the Bletchley Park Museum. That has not only the rooms rebuilt where they broke the Nazi codes, but they also have a museum of computing history that has hard disks the size of like your car and other things there. It's great.
Oh, yeah.
Well worth seeing.
I'm not sure about other museums, but in Munich, there is a very first electric computer, which was made by a German guy. What was the name of that guy? It was like the name of computers was Z1, Z2, Z3, like this, in 40s during the Second World War. So I had a picture and staying in front of this computer, then a computer in the electronic calculating machine.
That's it. Christopher has a lovely background from another machine which determined the outcome of Second World War.
This is the original Colossus, the first digital programmable electronic computer that broke the Lorenz code, the Nazi high command Lorenz code, and the Brits kept it secret until the mid-70s. So I think they lost their leg up by that, but it's great. You can see this at the Bletchley Park Museum.
Cool.
Well, I hope that Chengetai will tolerate our historical part of our session, or we should be moving into media res. I'm waiting just for him from Chengetai.
Moving from the past to the future.
Yeah. You know what Churchill said, in order to look forward, you have to also see backward. That's that interplay which is always important.
It's exactly, especially when you're speaking about technologies and the human behavior technologies. Have to predict what the cyber criminals are going to do next. Okay, so learn what
I think you can start now, actually. We're 4 minutes behind. Yes.
Thank you, Chengetai. Great for all of you. I really enjoyed enormously this intro and some sort of time machine with our panelists today, with Eugene, with Christopher, and other colleagues. And what we started as with some sort of message that in order to see forward, we have also to reflect on history and the past, especially on this interplay between technology and security. And my name is Jovan Kurbalija. I'm the head of Geneva Internet Platform and director of Diplo Foundation. I used to be co-director of the high-level panel on digital cooperation. It's my great honor to be today here with you to introduce our panelists through the time zones and through the way what they're seeing now. I'm connecting from the quite ghostly building of the UN here in Geneva. It's empty, not only because of pandemics, but it is almost 7:30. We have two of our colleagues in daytime zones. We have Ms. Itsumi Nakamitsu, the UN Under-Secretary General of Disarmament Affairs, connecting from New York. And we have Christopher Painter, President of Global Forum on Cyber Expertise. Chris is connecting from Washington, DC. Chris is one of the first cyber diplomats from the US administration. Then we have two panelists who are making real efforts to join us in this night zones. First, Eugene Kaspersky. I'm sure that there is no need to introduce Eugene, CEO of Kaspersky, and very well versed into the history of computer science. That should be probably topic for some good podcast or even a book, Eugene. Further to the east is our dear colleague Lata Reddy, co-chair of the Global Commission on the Stability of Cyberspace, another experienced cyber diplomat. And Lata, thank you for joining us. It's midnight in New Delhi, and that's really appreciated. Now let me come back to this middle zone, Euro-African, to introduce the other panelists today. We have John Denton joining us from Paris. John is the Secretary General of the International Chamber of Commerce. And we have Enrico Calandro, co-director of C3 Southern Africa and chair of GFC Research Committee. That's more or less geography of today's session. And I would like to thank Chengeta and the organizers of today's session to introducing some sort of time fairness. Usually our colleagues in Americas have to wake up early in the morning or stay late in the evening. And there is some sort of rebalance in that respect. Now, today's major topic for our discussion is a question of cybersecurity. And I will just try in a few minutes to paint the canvas or backdrop for our discussion today before I pass the floor for our eminent speakers and an excellent panel. Well, we are all familiar with what is going on around us and how the digital technology helped humanity to have some sort of societal business continuity over the last 7 or 8 months. Thanks to the robust digital infrastructure, students continued studying online. We were provided with even rather simple facilities, but important in the times of lockdown, of ordering food or working online. And sometimes it is given how the technical infrastructure, how the digital infrastructure really sustained in this difficult time. And I think we should be proud, especially those of you who are involved in ensuring that digital technology function. It is the major achievement. In this process of changes, what has happened, digital companies, tech companies became more important, more relevant, and more dependence on the digital technology, creating new vulnerabilities. And we will address them in a few minutes. Therefore, this is the general backdrop. Now, more specifically, cybersecurity issues and digital policy issues are raising in relevance in forums and international meetings worldwide. Now we are finishing the first week of Internet Governance Forum, and cybersecurity has not been picking up so much. Probably there was a need to have this important session and then to have more discussion on cybersecurity next week. Now, before I pass the floor to our panelists, I would like to ask Luis to pose put a survey to see what is the atmosphere in the room when it comes to the question of cybersecurity vulnerabilities. I hope that technology will serve us. If not, we'll be moving directly into discussion. Luis. Okay. Well, the question is, as you can see, is the current turbulent times, for many, the internet is essential to work, relax, and stay in touch with family and friends. How secure do you feel online, regardless of whether you use the internet for professional, family, or leisure? Bit long question, but what is your feeling about security of the internet? You feel very secure, secure, not particularly secure or insecure, unsecure, and very unsecure. Let me see what will be the answer from our colleagues here in the room. Unfortunately, those who are following on YouTube, and I guess there are more of them on YouTube, cannot participate in this survey. Okay, we'll be getting the news soon. And in the meantime, we'll be seeing from Luis what is the result. Okay. Well, we feel quite secure, not particularly secure, unsecure, very unsecure. It's a typical distribution when you ask this type of questions, but the answer is somewhere in the middle, and we will see if reality is also distributed in the same way. Okay, this is the general backdrop for our discussion today, and we move with the first intervention from Undersecretary General Nakamitsu. Zumi, the question is, what do you see as a threat to international ICT security posed by COVID-19? What are the main priorities or main concerns at the place where you are? You are in the middle of the negotiation, different policy processes on cybersecurity, sometimes complex. As we know, there are two parallel processes. What do you see as the threats for international ICT security? Over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Jovan. What a fascinating members on the panel. I would like to really congratulate you for putting together. And I like the way you started, actually. I mean, the internet or the digital technologies have definitely provided enormous opportunities. But I would like to add to that, just to complement, is that it is going to transform our lives, every aspect of our life, work, daily life, stay in touch, etc. What we are now experiencing is a transformative changes that is happening around the world. And that, of course, has an impact on where I am actually sitting. I am responsible for international security and disarmament issues at the United Nations. Of course, the downside of this positive, generally positive ICT technologies during the crisis is, of course, this change has been also accompanied by enormous spike in cyber incidents. The ITU, the International Telecommunications Union, has estimated that internet usage has increased during the pandemic by something like 30%. But in terms of cyber attacks or cyber incidents, the increase was actually almost 300%. So, you can see the enormous impact on the downside as well, even though there are a lot of positive, a lot of transformative and positive benefits that these technologies are bringing to us. And of course, our deep concern is the mounting malware campaigns against critical infrastructures, and especially during the COVID crisis, hospitals, medical research facilities, and other institutions over the past several months, and that includes the World Health Organization, for example. I'm told that WHO has reported experiencing more than 5 times the number of cyber attacks than in the same period last year. So these incidents are obviously compounding people's already widespread sense of insecurity around their health, livelihood, and future. Of course, the ordinary people are experiencing, this rapid increase of phishing, spear phishing incidents, etc. The malware, emails, etc. And of course, what we are wondering is whether this would also have a deep impact on more hardcore international peace and security issues. The kinds of cyber attacks that we are seeing, we are witnessing, is of course stopped short of a traditional use of force type of situations. It's not a kinetic scene, but it is increasingly posing a very difficult questions as to what it is that we are actually looking at in terms of a very serious cyber incidents that could potentially happen, impacting on critical infrastructures that are deeply connected or related to stability and security of our general environment. So this is for this reason, the Secretary General Guterres has indeed drawn attention to cyber attacks during the COVID-19 pandemic. And he has been repeatedly calling on the international community to do more to prevent and also end cyber attacks on critical civilian infrastructure, including healthcare facilities. I will stop here for now, and looking forward to more in-depth discussions in terms of what we need to do to making sure that first and foremost prevent and also ending cyber attacks.
Thank you, Undersecretary. Thank you, Izumi, for great painting of the landscape, including rather shocking numbers about discrepancy between raising the use of the internet 30% and 300% in the cyber attacks. Numbers are useful to give us some sort of bearings of the overall situation, and definitely we'll be coming back to the quite a few points that you raised in introductory statement on the actions from the UN Secretary General, on the actions and activities of your office, which are very, very important for the global cyber security. There was one interesting comment coming from the Amir Hossein. He commented on my sort of map of the time zones, and he introduced the first interesting point, that cybersecurity threats are as diverse as the time zones. This is just one challenging point for our discussion. Do we discuss the same, similar, or diverse type of cyber challenges? Now, there is no need to introduce Eugene. He introduced himself greatly about this survey of history of computers, and it triggered a fascinating discussion in the chat with mentioning of Fortran, COBOL, Sinclair, and other tools. I can see that the age distribution of the current panel is more to those of us who used to start using computers in 80s and 90s. But we would like to hear also from a younger generation about their concerns. Eugene, your company has been providing really detailed summary of cyber attacks and the painting of the current landscape. And you have this excellent, useful tool that we use, for example, for our courses when we teach cybersecurity on what is the current threat situation. Could you, in your first intervention, help in painting this overall current cybersecurity situation based on both data and your general insights, and then maybe hint to some actions that you have been suggesting or taking, and then we will be developing them throughout the discussion. Over to you.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Well, actually, the situation during the COVID time in the cyberspace is, well, more dangerous, of course, obviously more dangerous than before. Well, actually, there are two factors which activate the cybercrime. The first factor is that many people, they stay at home, so they spend more time in the internet. So the bad guys, they can easily hack the more victims than before. The second factor is that many enterprises, well, most of our companies, they send employees home, but they are not able to guarantee the same level of security as within the corporate perimeter. So the people are left at home with some basic security, but they can access the enterprise network. So the criminals, they use this to hack. They hack their home computers to access the enterprise networks. That's why we see the increase of the number of the hackers attacks, the activity of cyber criminals, and actually we have quite a detailed data even for countries, because we have our customers, they are based in many countries around the world. So we see our sensors, see the statistics of the criminal activities. So if you want to see more details, just visit our website, securelist.com, and there's a statistic page, so you can see this data there. Speaking about the malicious code, I will say that it's about 20-25 increase in numbers of new malicious applications. So before COVID, we were collecting about 350,000 new malicious applications, new malicious files a day. So every day, about 350,000 new malicious files, which we never saw before. Right now, we collect more than 400,000 malicious files a day. It means that the global cybercrime is getting more active. And actually, I don't know how many people are in this business. 10,000, 100,000. Well, actually, the numbers are huge. A number of the attacks and different tools developed by the bad guys. So the global cybercrime is massive, but in most of cases, that's technically it's not really a problem to protect people, protect computers, smartphones, devices from this kind of attacks, because most of them, they're junior, so they're not too much complicated. So technically speaking, it's not a problem to release the antidote for this kind of computer malware or cyber malware. The rising problem is that many of these junior cyber criminals, they're getting more smart, they are getting more experienced, and they join professional hackers team, or they create the new highly professional cyber gangs. And at the moment we are monitoring, it's about 200 of professional cyber gangs which develop quite sophisticated cyber attacks. And they're able to hack even very well protected organizations like banks, governments. So actually, this is a problem to protect the system from their targeted attacks, highly complicated, sophisticated, and unfortunately, in some cases, very successful kind of the malicious tools. And at the same time, speaking about the physical systems, the infrastructure, the critical infrastructure, well, we have more and more reports that the criminal gangs, they access, they try to, well, it's not targeted attacks, but they try they touch infrastructure, they touch the SCADA systems which are connected to the internet. And we don't have too many reports of the targeted attacks on the systems. It seems that they see that they're not just individuals, not just the computer networks, office networks connected to the internet. They see the physical infrastructure. They, in most of cases, they don't know what to do with that. But I am afraid in the future, the criminals, they will easily recognize the power of attacks on the physical infrastructure. And I'm afraid that we are living in times when the criminals, they're turning to SCADA systems, from attacks on individuals, attacks on the office networks, enterprise office networks, turning to the physical systems, turning to SCADA. Well, they are already in Internet of Things. They were botnet, Mirai botnet, infecting the security cameras, video cameras. And actually, that was one of the most successful cyber attack, global attack, and living for years. So I'm afraid the next is massive attacks. on infrastructure, on the physical infrastructure. Not like now, so they're just very, very few cases, actually, targeted cases. But I'm afraid in the future, the situation will be changed. And unfortunately, this evolution of cybercrime is really, really activated by COVID times, because there's so many victims online. Criminals, they're humans as well, so they stay at home as other people do, so they have more time to improve the technologies, to improve the activity. So actually, I'm afraid that situation with cybercrime is getting from bad to worse. So that's why the importance of cybersecurity and active measures about the criminals is getting more and more important. Thank you.
Thank you, Eugene. I hope that we have the vaccine for this type of the virus that is coming into our computers, but this is the question that we may reflect later on. You introduced quite a few important elements, including this increasing vulnerability in the dynamics between home and the office, which is completely new element. Also element of professional versus newcomers into the cybercrime field. This is the profession in itself, which has its own logic and dynamics and subculture, like all criminal organizations. Therefore, we may later on reflect on it a bit more. We are in the similar time zone, moving a bit east towards the latter. We are now getting these threads into our tapestry of today's session with the Izumi bring the links from the UN, Eugene from the, let's say, trenches of the cyber security, where he is protecting many computers worldwide. And we would like to hear from you on your experience as cyber diplomat and also person involved in geopolitics. Therefore, we are connecting now individual business level to the global level. Over to you, Lata.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jovan. And given my background as a cyber diplomat, as you described me, for me, the key problem or challenge is now the difficulties in advancing dialogues on preventing cyber attacks, even in a critical area like the health sector. Because if we can't agree on a norm to say that attacks on the health sector are unacceptable during a global pandemic, then really the purpose of international cooperation is not being served very well. In the present tense geopolitical climate and the tense relationships between major powers, it's very hard to focus on really vital international cooperation in policy issues. But cyber has never been more important, and dialogue on cybersecurity has also never been more important than it is today. If we were to look at intergovernmental tensions today, we could see in the context of what I'd like to call a possible tech war, you can see 5 fronts emerging. You can see the question of resources. You can see the question of network infrastructures. You can see the question of operating systems. You can see platforms, and you can see content and data. There's, I would say, almost at the moment, a Cold War-like situation prevailing between major powers. But fortunately, due to globalization, we do not have an iron curtain between the opponents. The curtain we have today is flexible, porous, and not opaque. Perhaps we can call it the bamboo curtain, to quote Nitin Pai of Takshashila. I like this term. In other words, we can find a way to cooperate, provided everybody agrees that this is a global challenge and agrees that in pandemic times, certain things must be out of bounds for cyber attacks. How can countries cope? We should continue our dialogues on internet cooperation, internet governance, on international cooperation, and possibly on safeguarding the health sector through a universally agreed norm. And we should simultaneously build bubbles of technology trust with our strategic partners. I'll come back to this idea of bubbles of trust later in my intervention. But I hope this sets it in the context of diplomacy, international cooperation, and norm building. Thank you.
We have a Cold War in making, but there is no Iron Curtain yet. Diplomacy facilitates dialogue, but not as effective yet as it should be. Focus on the norms in the most critical sectors like health sector and develop more cooperation. Great inputs in making all this cybersecurity canvas vivid and relevant. Now from the UN business sector, geopolitical aspects from Latvia, we are moving to again to business sector, but to John Dennon, Secretary General of International Chamber of Commerce, place where I guess many questions and some complaints around cybersecurity are coming from Chamber of Commerce worldwide and also small and medium enterprises. John, what would be your input on this question? What are the major cybersecurity challenges that we are facing in COVID-19 crisis, especially from the business perspective? Over to you.
Well, thanks so much, Jovin. It's great to be on the panel, and it's great to be back at the IGF. I'm sorry we're not there in person, but that's just the way it works. Maybe I can put it a little bit differently. I actually see a paradox. Let's be very clear. So the International Chamber of Commerce, we're the institutional voice of 46 million businesses now. And we know that COVID-19 has had a real and dramatic impact on what we call the real economy. And the real economy is actually the way in which SMEs, micro SMEs interact, and they've been subject to extraordinary supply shock and demand shock. We've seen collapse of supply chains. We've seen the economic impact beating them up even before the health problems got to them. And so it's actually been a really troubled time. One way that we've been working with the SMEs is we've actually run a major campaign called Save Our SMEs. And part of that has actually been to work on the digitalization of SMEs and micro SMEs. Because I think, as you all understand, and I think as Eugene said, and Ambassador Nzumi said as well, and you know, in this time of COVID, what we've seen is because of social distancing, the need to actually go online. And so we've been enabling that. The paradox, of course, is we've been enabling that at exactly the same time as we've seen not the new feature, which is these kind of dark, menacing players, these kind of robbers or the black-hearted, as I think Eugene almost described them, playing in this space as well. So we've actually been encouraging mass uptake of digitization for SMEs and micro SMEs. At the same time, this has been a dramatic increase in malware, phishing, all those sorts of attacks on SMEs and micro SMEs. And of course, one of the challenges is that SMEs and micro SMEs don't operate as independent entities always. They're actually integral parts of supply chains. So what's actually happening here is the weakest link, arguably in a supply chain, is being attacked. So what we're actually seeing is an increased vulnerability of the real economy to attacks through cybersecurity in the heart of COVID-19 and the response. And yet the only way we can effectively respond economically is in a way to suck up that risk. And then what we have to do is actually find tools, find approaches that can manage that. And I was very much taken by Ambassador Reddy's comment that what we actually need to grapple with this is not just more training, more concern. We actually need really effective interplay between government, the private sector, civil society, to actually develop up a framework, but also a culture which actually puts cyber risk as a classic risk that needs to be managed. We can't eradicate cyber risk. I think Eugene could show us exactly why we can't eradicate it, but we can treat dealing with it as a process that we need to manage. And what we do need in order to enable that to happen is a lot more cooperation. We still see too few countries actually take up some of the most important elements in terms of computer emergency response task forces, etc. And we do need a recognition that this is a global problem, So frankly, wealthier countries, wealthier companies need to be helping, investing in supporting the development of the tools to enable the SMEs and micro SMEs to no longer be the weakest links, but actually to enable themselves to build resilience so that they can participate in the real economy effectively and save lives and livelihoods and manage a process which can actually limit the impact of cyber risk. That's what we see, and that's what we think needs to happen. Because frankly, we will, as I said, this paradox continues. We have just launched a major campaign to digitize a further 5 million SMEs and micro SMEs so that they can go forward and actually operate in the 21st century, but particularly be part of the economic recovery.
John, a fascinating survey of the current situation in the modern economy. Thank you for that. And you triggered one thought on one question for our audience and for our panelists that we may come to later on. Whom we call when we have a problem, we as a SME or we as a citizens or we as a countries. Is it a company help desk, or do we need the help desk with governments or international help desk? For us here in the panel, in the session, I'm sure that we are aware of CERTs and the bodies, but for a young person just starting startup company or a citizen, that may be a challenge. Therefore, this is just one question that we may try to reflect on. Very simple question, bringing geopolitical issues to reality of the people worldwide. Wow, that's a great session. Thank you. Thank you. It's so easy to moderate it with such a great inputs. Now we move to Chris. Chris is in DC. There is no need to introduce Chris Painter now in his current role as the president of Global Forum Cyber Expertise. Chris, I know you can reflect on so many issues, but what would you pick up from the threads developing so far and develop them further? Over to you.
Well, it was great hearing the other panelists. I sort of feel like a lot of the things have been said, and there's this old saying, everything's been said, but I haven't said it yet. So I'll try to avoid that and actually talk about some new things. I mean, obviously, I think the pandemic has just highlighted what we're already seeing. We're seeing great threats to cyberspace, to both on an individual level, on a nation state level, transnational criminal groups, nation states, others who are involved in this. And that's just accelerated with COVID because I think it's highlighted our vulnerabilities and our dependencies on these systems. And that's hardly a surprise. It's unfortunate. Every time we've had a major disaster of any kind, there are always this group of criminals who try to attack that and take advantage of it. So it's hardly surprising. It's unfortunate though. So what does that highlight for me? Well, a couple of things. One, we're seeing these kinds of threats. I'm still worried about new threats. One of them, my friend, the former president of Estonia, Thomas Ilves, always talks about a threat and worry about the integrity of information. And I worry about denial of service attacks. I worry about thefts. I worry more if someone breaks into a hospital and actually changes my blood type so the next time I get a transfusion, I die, or that financial markets can't settle. We haven't seen that much yet, but I think that could be the wave of the future, and we have to worry about that. But what says to me is two things. One, there's a little bit of a silver lining here. To the extent there's any silver lining to COVID, and there's really not much of one, it's that it has shown to countries around the world, both developing countries and developed countries, that this is an area of real priority, that we're so dependent on these systems that cybersecurity can't be treated as just this boutique throw-off issue, but it is a core issue for all of us. And it needs to be treated as a core political issue, a core issue that is a national security issue, an economic prosperity issue, a human rights issue, and also ultimately a foreign policy issue. In terms of diplomacy, back when my office was created back in 2011, we were the first ones in the world at that time dedicated to these issues. There are about 40 and growing around the world, and that's important because it's being treated not just as this technical issue, and the technical aspects are clearly important, but as a policy issue. And just like you don't need to be a nuclear engineer to understand the aspects of nuclear policy, you don't need to be a coder to understand the national security, economic, and human rights implications of cybersecurity and how we do that. So that's one thing I think is really important, that it gives us an opportunity to mainstream this issue like we haven't done before, and we need to do that. The second thing I'd say is it highlights for me the necessity, and this shouldn't be surprising coming from my perspective as now the president of the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise Foundation, the necessity for capacity building around the world, and capacity building in many different ways. Capacity building to help countries both developing countries and developed countries. Again, there's lots of developing countries who do not have the expertise, the resources, the structures in place, the national strategies. We have to work with those. And that's something that my organization, which is a multi-stakeholder organization, which includes nations, like 60 countries, over 60 countries, civil society, the private sector, academia, has been really focused on trying to coordinate some of that capacity building, but also the kind of policy capacity building that's around, how do you engage in these diplomatic debates that are happening in the UN that Sumi and others have talked about. So I think we need to be able to do more on that level too. So it gives us an opportunity to do that, but we need to really, again, treat capacity building in cyber as not some odd duck, but really as a core part, a foundational part for our future prosperity and a foundational part of the UN's development goals as well. The last thing I wanted to touch on was just talking about the role of diplomacy. And I do think diplomacy and the negotiations that are happening now are critically important. I think the norms that were agreed to in 2015 are critically important. We need to continue to get those implemented around the world and understood around the world. The confidence building measures, spreading those through regional and other organizations, critically important. How international law applies is important to all of our safety and security and stability going forward. But we also have to make sure there's accountability for transgressors. And I don't mean escalatory accountability. I mean accountability so that we hold account those who break these rules, these understandings. But we need to think about how we can do that as a world community. And again, I think that goes hand in glove with developing the rules of the road. Is how do you make sure that there's accountability for those? And lastly, I just say that again all folds into this idea of capacity building, which is the discussions in New York. Almost everyone mentioned this, and that was pre-COVID. And now I hear it even more post-COVID, where we're doing everything virtually. And that's a good thing. There's this saying, never let a good crisis go to waste. I don't want to be quite that crass, but I would say we need to make sure that we don't lose this opportunity, that people don't forget how important this is. And when we see these attacks on hospitals and others, that we actually have a way to elevate this issue to prime ministers, to presidents, to CEOs at companies, outside of the cyber club that we're all in.
Thank you, Chris. I think that we are doing very well on your plea to build the communication between different policy communities. We haven't been using jargon. We did a bit in the pre-session with the history, but it was tolerated. But throughout the session, we stayed very careful away from the technological or diplomatic or policy jargon. And it is great, and I think we should continue in the same way. Chris, there is one potential controversial topic for discussion. While I completely agree with your view that policy circles, the leaders, diplomats should be aware of the political aspects of technology. We have to see what are the potentials of security by design and how far we can go with security by design. I know that Eugene has been thinking a lot and working on that, and we'll hear later on in the second iteration about this interplay between security by design, technical solution versus diplomatic political solution. Once more, thank you, Chris. Now in this lovely interplay, we move to technology again. Enrico Calandro joining us from Cape Town. Enrico, what is your take on this discussion between policy, diplomacy, geostrategy, technology, economy?
Thank you very much, Jovan, for having me at this high-level panel. I think it's interesting to see that actually there are so many participants online, I would say at a relatively late time in our time zone and also towards East, meaning that probably people feel safer online than offline. Or maybe that's unfortunately the result of these restrictions resulting from COVID-19. But so the perspective that actually I would like to provide, I'm a social scientist by profession. So I'll try to describe how new forms of cyber-mediated processes can become a threat to human security. So I'm going to talk about people with a focus also on developing countries, because that's the focus of my activities and research. So COVID-19 has shown to all of us that good quality, affordable, and ubiquitous access to the internet is not a luxury, but it's a critical lifeline. And in developing countries, actually, access to the internet is still a luxury for the majority of people. So any barriers that actually stop us from using the internet in a safe and secure way threaten to strip us of this lifeline. In developing countries, cyber threats and risks are an extension of the persistent and increasing digital inequalities that have grown together with digitalization. The current state of cybersecurity vulnerabilities illustrates a considerable security gap beyond the digital divide gap, which is exacerbating existing patterns of inequality for individuals, for countries, and for regions. Now, if we take a human-centric perspective to cybersecurity, I think that 4 main threats have become particularly problematic from a policy perspective, because policy and political responses have not been able actually to tackle these problems. That there is some barrier also of addressing them from a cybersecurity point of view that normally, addresses issues of technical nature, IT and computer and network securities. And here I'm referring to the so-called infodemic and the COVID-19 related cybercrime, online violence, and risks of increased state surveillance. So these 4 phenomena have either emerged from the pandemic or have been exacerbated with the pandemic, or have compromised the response of different countries to COVID-19. So from the point of view of internet diffusion in the African continent, which is probably, as we know, characterized by novel and first-time users that are using the internet through the mobile phone and primarily on social media, I think it becomes clear that the population is highly vulnerable to infodemic. The main danger of infodemic is that it speeds up the epidemic process by influencing and fragmenting responses to fight against the virus and the pandemic. Then partially related to the infodemic, and I think certainly growing from it, is the phenomenon of COVID-19 related cybercrime. And we actually talked a little bit about that, because infodemic can also be a vector of large-scale cyber attacks. And that's what we have seen as well. So cyber criminals, spread messages to plant malware, phishing credentials, or ask for Bitcoins donations. But campaign of disinformation can actually facilitate cyber attacks also based on the exploitation of other human vulnerabilities, such as fears, anxieties, and they can also foment racist and xenophobic behavior. Another pandemic, which I think has been exacerbated by the COVID-19 outbreak and increased internet use, is the pandemic of online violence, and especially against women and girls, and also against people experiencing multiple forms of discrimination and vulnerability at the intersection between gender, age, education, and other social demographics. So as digitalization becomes more pervasive also in developing countries, the reality that the problem is getting worse, it's not improving. The last threat is related to an increasing number of these tracking and contact tracing technologies to identify and support quarantine. Tracking and tracing technologies are important to find the pandemic, as we know, but surveillance needs to be done in compliance with data protection regulation and due respect for privacy and confidentiality. But it might be ineffective in countries with low levels of smartphone diffusion, because you can't simply collect data, and it can also place citizens at risk of privacy violation in jurisdictions with poor data protection frameworks, or in countries that have difficulties in enforcing these frameworks where the legislation is actually present. Thank you.
Thank you, Enrico, for enriching what Chris started with the human rights, societal, legal, and other aspects of cybersecurity discussion, which cannot be discussed in isolation, and bringing infodemics and all of this concept. Our apology for some problems with unmuting, muting. This is going to be definitely the keyword of the 2020. Can you hear me, or unmute yourself or mute? Therefore, I think it's now fixed. We have all these threads from the first iteration of your introductory statements. We are receiving quite a few interesting questions, and I will just read them, question and comments, before I invite you to comment on those few issues that emerged in the first part of the session. Mike Nelson, great regards to Mike. He say 2 questions, 3 words. We don't see the questions, but 3 words are encryption, digital, and ID. Maybe some of you can comment on this cybersecurity trinity. Amir Hussein Mokaberi, there are 2 camps. Some countries want to regulate cyber conflicts and some want to prevent cyber conflict. Recognizing the cyberspace as a 5th domain of warfare rather than as a civilian and only peaceful environment will have to which camp? That's an interesting question, especially for those of you involved in geopolitics. Jacques Benglier, great regards to Jacques. Drawing from the COVID discussion, should citizens, including corporate citizens, be patronized, enforced, sanctioned to protect themselves from cyber dangers, or should this be prohibited as a restriction of personal freedom of doing business? Well, we won't have a boring discussion, I can see, and I invite our attendees, including one of the fathers of the internet, Vint Cerf, best regards to Vint, to bring their comments and questions. Now we are going to the second iteration based on these questions and the leads from the initial discussion. And we'll ask Izumi, Undersecretary Nakamitsu, could you tell us what has been achieved under the auspices of the UN? Izumi, you have heard many sort of inputs on current situation, concern, threats and risk. What is happening at the UN and what we can expect from the UN in this context of answering some of these concerns? Over to you.
Okay, thank you. I feel that, the panelists, definitely all of the panelists and also vast majority of the people in the audience, they are already fully aware of what has been achieved at the United Nations and what is going on currently in the UN. But just to recap very, very quickly, of course, the UN has been tackling this issue for many years now. There are 6 iterations of what we call the groups of governmental experts that, they have been studying and analyzing and deliberating on key issues. And then this GGE has indeed managed to agree in the past, for example, that international law, in particular the UN Charter, applies to the use of ICT. So, this links up with one of the questions that you read out. It's an interesting question. I would like to perhaps comment on that a little bit later. And also, the group has recommended very practical confidence building and capacity building measures. I completely agree with Chris Painter on the importance of capacity building, and I think this is something that we still need to really develop. This is a critical component of the work ahead. And in particular, 2015 GGE were also able to recommend 11 voluntary non-binding norms of responsible state behavior in the use of ICTs. And these norms cover key issues, including cooperation between states in the use of ICTs, the respect for human rights in the digital sphere, someone mentioned that also, and the protection of infrastructure, critical infrastructure from cyber attacks. And some of these norms, of course, are technical and operational in nature, but also do with the responsible reporting of ICT vulnerabilities, as well as preventing proliferation of malicious tools and techniques. So they are, good practices that are recommended under these norms on the part of private sector industry people. Now, in 2018, as you all know already, I'm sure, a new GGE has been established under the UN, and they are in the middle of their work, discussing especially the strengthening of the norms, but also confidence building and capacity building issues. And of course, there is a new process, new platform that was established at the UN, which is inclusive. It's called Open Network Working Group, They are also, the first group of open-ended working group is still in the process of deliberating and bringing it to a conclusion next year. But also very recently, just a couple of days ago, the first committee of the General Assembly also decided to create another open-ended working group for the duration of 5 years. So it's very much still work in progress, but there are some good solid foundations that we have we have been able to agree on. The key, in my view, is to make sure that these norms so far agreed to will be fully implemented. I think one thing is to have a good normative framework, but another thing which is critical is to making sure that this is implemented. And of course, going forward, in order for us to be able to prevent major cyber attacks and cyber incidents, I think we need to have confidence building measures and capacity building. And this perhaps we will be able to discuss in the next, what lies ahead in terms of key challenges. One thing that I would add is that we are really increasingly aware, and actually has acted upon already once in the context of the open-ended working group, that this has to be taken in a multi-stakeholder discussions. This is not really just, governments, cyber diplomats coming and discussing, but we need to have a really meaningful engagement of industry people, researchers, and technical people, civil society included. We are still exploring what more we could do in this regard. And I will be very keen to listen to potentially some creative suggestions on how the UN can indeed improve on multi-stakeholderness, if you will, of those conversations. As you know, it has not been so far a strength of the United Nations necessarily, but we are acutely aware of that. And going forward, we need to make sure that we have meaningful inputs, participation from various stakeholders who actually can make a huge contributions in this.
Thank you, Izumi, and thank you for your efforts to bridge all of these processes. Your office has been trying to find connecting points on capacity building, sharing information, and it's fascinating to bridge what is political reality and to do maximum out of it for the cybersecurity. There was one question maybe that could be answered later on by you or somebody else. Well, I would say by most of the participants, which from Charlene van der Beek from a diplomat here in Geneva, which existing or new forum would be most appropriate in your view to make real global progress on addressing cyber threats? Which features should it include and which should it avoid? That's an interesting question for the complete panel, and I would like to invite others to think about it. Now we move to Eugene. Eugene, you said initially this very interesting discussion. There are many threads that you can pick from this discussion and comment. Personally, I would like to hear your view on this interplay between policy and technology, security by design, that one point, and maybe one point, I know you're very keen on capacity development and you have your academy, Kaspersky Academy. What would be 3 points in the curriculum for diplomats and the leaders of the world that you would like to teach them during one of the courses? Over to you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And actually, I have some ideas how to answer some questions which you already mentioned. But in many cases, there is no simple answer, yes or no. In many cases, there's something in between. So yes and yes. And speaking about the importance of cooperation against cybercrime, how to fight, how to address the cyber threats issues. I think that there have to be 3 things have to be done: technologies, education, and law enforcement, including the international cooperation. So actually, I can speak about all these three vectors of three vectors of fighting the cyber threats in the cyberspace. Well, speaking about the technologies, I believe that okay, so we know how to protect the computer systems and smartphones. And actually, we can guarantee very high technologies can guarantee very high level of protection. But if we turn to industrial systems, Internet of Things, if we keep in mind that there are more and more such devices around us, gadgets, of everything. Actually, it's not possible to develop security, cyber security, for you. Fridge, coffee machine, vacuum cleaner, security camera, etc., etc., etc. Actually, my the major idea is that we need to develop the systems which are secure by design, and I call it cyber immunity. So actually, we have this platform. This is operating system which is quite compact. It's not multifunctional. It's not like Microsoft Windows or Linux. No, that's simply not possible to build the security, true secure or immune scenarios based on these operating systems. So it's completely different, and it's good enough for Internet of Things. Well, actually, what we do, we design the architecture of the systems in such a way that it's simply not possible to hack it. But at the same time, these systems, they are quite flexible. You can update it, you can install bad applications. So actually, it works. And we have the first Internet of Things, first cyber gadgets. Sometimes they are quite unique, which are developed on top of this immunity platform or immune operating system. For example, I just have it on my table. This is the industrial gateway, which can connect the SCADA system to the internet in a secure way. So it's a gateway which is made on this immune operating system. And we have some other stuff, but I'm not going to make the advertisement on this technologies and the products. Well, actually, technically speaking, for Internet of Things and for industrial system, for infrastructure, especially critical infrastructure, we can reach such a level of security, then successful attack will cost more than possible damage. So the bad guys, the attackers, they must invest more than possible damage at the victim side. So I named this level of security immunity. So for the bad guys, there is no reason to hack the system. So technically speaking, it is possible to develop such technologies which you can guarantee that your Internet of Things, your infrastructure, your production lines, they're unhackable. So it's it's about the technologies. And speaking about international cooperation, it's the first time I said about that it's a must to have international cooperation. That was early 2000, somewhere the same time. Then there was a Budapest Convention on the cybercrime was introduced. Maybe I was the first to say Internet Interpol to investigate and to find the bad guys in the cyberspace. So we need to have some kind of the international cyber forces to hunt for these guys. Unfortunately, what's going on, the world is getting unfortunately more fragmented, and the geopolitical situation is very far from perfect. And I'm afraid the cooperation between different countries from different parts of the geopolitical landscape, in some cases they're getting worse. Well, actually, I'm not a politician. I'm not the president of the world to fix it. So I just do my best to advise others that we need to change that. We all are living in a cyber age, in a cyberspace. So to keep this place safe and secure, or at least to move into the direction of the safe internet, or the safe cyberspace, we need to cooperate and forget about the rest of geopolitical stuff. In the cyberspace, the nations must cooperate because once again, we are living in the same cyberspace and we're facing very same cyber threats. And actually, their cyber systems, they're getting more important. The infrastructure critical infrastructure depends on cyber more and more. It's vulnerable, and actually that's the way the world is being developed. It's danger. So we need to fix it. We need to create the new the new ideas how to build the more trust in the cyberspace and how to make nations to work together against the cyber threats.
Thank you. Thank you, Eugene, for introducing. We have a great dictionary today, cyber immunity. We have internet, Interpol, which is now a bit, which, as you said, it's a historical need for digital, for cooperation across the board. In the closing, in the next iteration, you may give us also the answer to this question: what would be curriculum for diplomats and politicians on cybersecurity? Three major points. We now move to India, to Lata. Lata, you introduced this interesting concept of trust bubble. You may reflect briefly on that, or any question that has been emerging on, let's say, on geopolitical aspect, on question of two camps. Amir Hossein mentioned the two camps and how they contribute to the cybersecurity. Just pick one of these questions and reflect on it. But tell us more about trust bubble. This is an interesting concept.
The question of the trust bubble, Jovan, was, to build lasting partnerships and deal effectively with cybersecurity issues, we need strategic partnerships. That's what I call a trust bubble, or in fact, we would call it technical bubbles of trust. What should each country expect from such a partner in a tech bubble? Firstly, you'll have to have political and strategic convergence. Secondly, you would have to have trust in each other's legal and jurisprudence systems. Thirdly, you would have to have a broad-based economic partnership across technology, trade, services, defense, and other key areas. And lastly, is there broad people-to-people trust between the peoples of each country? So I think that is absolutely necessary if we are to go forward with this idea of technology bubbles of trust, or in fact for strategic partnerships between countries. I think that there are concerns today about the technology of trade, for instance, or trade technology. As we saw in 5G, vendors are no longer judged only on price and effectiveness, but also on location and geopolitical tensions. There are concerns about the country of origin and the prevailing legal systems in that country. And of course, the relationship with that country. Therefore, it's no longer run purely on commercial considerations. And this certainly will present a lot of difficulties for sellers and buyers. And I think this is where the bubbles of trust will play an even greater role. I'm sorry, Jovan, I've forgotten the second question you asked me. Was there anything else you wanted me to comment on?
No, there was one question by Charlene, which was asked, what would be should be the fora? Do we need to create one fora to discuss cybersecurity, multiply, where that coordination should happen on the global level? That's, let's say, policy geopolitical question. I think that was one of the comments in chat.
Well, I certainly think that we do need to coordinate our efforts in so many different fora. There is a huge multiplicity of effort, and we are having dialogues in so many different fora, whether it's the Paris Peace Forum, the IGF, our own global commissions, which I worked on, and any number of think tanks, etc. So in one sense, it would be good to have a body come together where all these efforts could be coordinated and classified together. But I think it'll be very difficult because at the moment, there's not much appetite to create another international mechanism. And certain countries would certainly be opposed to creating a global internationally recognized body to deal with these cyber issues.
Thank you, Lata. That was one of the questions of high-level panel that was probably one of the underlying and most challenging questions. Whom to call to address your digital issues, not only cybersecurity, but in general digital issues, which is a huge challenge for small and developing countries. While big countries, we have many forums, but we may get to that point in the next with John. John, whom businesses can call to address their digital issues and all of these concerns, or you can pick on any other points from our discussion.
Well, straight up, there's, I think if anyone said there was one person to call, I think that there would be grossly misleading. So I think that's the first point to make. Look, I might just open this intervention by saying this time 12 months ago, I actually was at the IGF and I launched one of the famous ICC campaigns to make technology work for all. And I did that because we recognize, I think as we all do, the digital divide. But the point I want to focus on today is there's also a capability divide, which we actually need to think about in terms of digital capacity divide as well. And I think that's been touched on a bit by Eugene and also by Lata so far. Where I'm getting to here is that what we see too often now is the absence of an effective regulatory framework, both at a policy level and at a legal level, to actually encompass and enable the kind of things that we want to see on cyber. And that's something that we see as an element which is missing, not everywhere, but in many, many economies, and in many respects, even in some surprising economies. The private sector can do so much, but in the end, to create these frameworks, these policy frameworks, which are capable of being implemented by regulation and by law, we actually need governments to step up. And we still see too many governments without that capacity. And so the private sector simply cannot do the heavy lifting at all on its own. But the point I would make there is that even in developed countries, and this partly picks up, I think, the comment that Azumi was made much earlier on, if you want to develop good policy, even good policy frameworks in developed countries, you can't do it in isolation. Best policy always has a strong business voice in it and civil society, and in particular when it comes to issues like digital. And the reason for that is that ultimately we have to implement it. So if you don't involve the end users or the key stakeholders in the development of policy, then you'll always end up with difficulties. And that's just in developed countries. But in developing countries, we also need, and I shouldn't say this is only reserved for developing countries, because there are a number of developed countries without, I think, the requisite framework in place. We need to work together, and they need to acknowledge that if we need to call anyone, it's got to be someone who is actually able to encapsulate civil society, the private sector, and government, and put the citizen at the center in order to achieve this. So in a way, it's almost the holy trinity that we actually need to have in place to deliver on this outcome. And so one of the questions or one of the observations made in the chat was that in order to help SMEs and micro SMEs combat cyber, we should look to the wonderful tools from the Cyber Readiness Institute. Please be assured we are doing so. Please be assured that that is something we see as critical. You know, and please be assured that the ICC, we have, 5 years ago, we actually preempted this debate by the standards that we created and the guidance we gave out. That still rings true. I was just looking at some of the points we made in our guidance 5 years ago, and it actually still, a vision the companies should adopt, a holistic approach, looking at effective risk mitigation and preparation to breaches. All the elements we talked about there and a more detailed paper are all still relevant. So I hope that's useful to you, but it's actually ensuring that there is this stakeholder engagement in the formation of policy and regulations and law, but actually governments ultimately need to act, but we need to help them act as best as possible with all those inputs. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, John, for bringing more precision to multi-stakeholder approach. Sometimes we stay on the general notion, but you zoomed in both reasons and practicalities how multi-stakeholder approach can function. And I think this is under-researched and under-discussed issue, because if you want multi-stakeholder approach to flourish, we need really to zoom and to develop a procedure and the approach is much better. We will be moving now to Chris, but Chris, you can think on the few questions that remain unanswered. There was a question on 2 camps. There is a comments from Wolfgang, very interesting as always from Wolfgang Kleinwachter. UNGG and Open Energy Working Group are important. Probably some progress can be reached in the next 2 years. Optimistic view. Let's hear from the panelists if they share the optimism from Wolfgang. But we should discuss also progress in the laws and the lethal autonomous weapon system group. The regional wars of today, from Libya to Caucasus, are test bed how AI and internet-based devices, drone and robots can be integrated in the military operation. There has to be discussed also in multi-stakeholder environment. As always, challenging thoughts from the Wolfgang. Chris, a lot on your plate. 2 camps, geopolitics. Wolfgang, go ahead.
I love Wolfgang, but look, I think all these issues are going to increasingly be multi-stakeholder, and they're increasingly going to be interrelated as well. And I want to pick up on one thing that was just said by John, which is it is important to have multi-stakeholders, different stakeholders as we develop policy. And this is one of the things that the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise tries to do. When we talk to countries, for instance, about having national strategies, which is often the document that shows it's a priority for that country as the organizing document for that country, that they should create that strategy by talking to a number of stakeholders, not just government stakeholders, but industry, academia, civil society. That's a best practice, and we try to showcase that. I'd say a couple other things too. I don't agree, using a term I've used before, that we need one ring to rule them all, that we need one giant institution that's going to take up all these issues. Frankly, it would collapse on its own weight. It would be too complex, too hard to actually have any effective function. And I think what we need to do is make the existing dialogues we have, including in the UN, more effective rather than trying to create a new one. I similarly think that one of the questions was about, do we need a new a binding cybercrime treaty or cybersecurity treaty? And I have the same feeling about that. We are still in the early throes of this issue. We need to focus on things like, what are the expectations? What are the rules of the road? What are the norms? Getting countries to follow those. We could think about something down the line, but a treaty doesn't solve our issues in this space either. Countries violate existing treaties. So that doesn't make you have a treaty and everything goes away. We need to think about what the rules of the road are and get some consensus around that and get those implemented. I think that's critically important. I guess the other issue is 2 other issues. One was on cyber. Someone talked about you mentioned to Latha or someone else, I think, Eugenie, about the idea of a course for cyber diplomats. Well, that is critically important. We did that internally when I was in the State Department. We trained officers around the world. We brought them all back to DC. We had Vint talk to them. We had people talking about geopolitical issues so that they were trained in that. Estonia has been doing a good job on that, training diplomats on cyber, and they've had several programs. Your organization has been doing work on that. UNIDIR has been doing good work on that. This is an important issue to get these people up to speed, and that's another thing that the GFC is focused on. And then the final question I'll take a swing at is the one of, there are 2 camps, managing conflict and preventing conflict. I don't think that's really true. I think those things merge, right? If we think that cyber tools are not going to be used for offensive operations, that may be a fanciful way to think of the world, but that's not going to happen, right? There's no way that's going to happen. So how do we, just like we do in other areas, control this and make sure that conflict doesn't occur? So part of controlling conflict and having rules of the road, international law and norms is to prevent conflict. So, and we should be working toward that. So I don't see those as opposite things. I see those as merging together. So try to hit a lot of different issues in that short blurb, but thanks for that.
Thank you, Chris. And please help me not to become persona non grata with the IGF Secretariat because of time management. But it is such a unique opportunity to have so good speakers and inspiring speakers and very good question. From Christian Roy, a question on the funding and the skeptical view about the need for any sort of centralization in that respect. And it has been elephant in the room, if I can say, small or big elephant, to use that metaphor. Do we need a central space? And then there was a question, interesting question from Mark Carvel, from a UK leading digital diplomat, recently retired. Should IGF Plus establish a dedicated observatory for cybersecurity that provides policy and technical advice, education, skill, capacity building resources? This is an interesting issue. Probably building inputs from GFC, other existing initiative. Great work of Singapore, by the way, in the field of cybersecurity and training. Therefore, that's one of the concrete question and suggestion. Discussion is really moving fast in the chat, and we have 10 minutes now. I will just give a chance to Enrico. Enrico, so many questions from discussion. Help me to stay within the next 10 minutes limits of this session. With your comment, pick on any of these leads in our discussion and comment on it. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Jovan. I'll try to be very brief. I would like then to maybe to expand a little bit on this idea of the cyber observatory at the UN. So as a researcher, I truly believe that the domain of the cyberspace cannot be isolated by unique national and regional contexts. That somehow can create a distinct set of challenges. And if it's through research that you can identify then different maybe priorities and mechanisms for governing cybersecurity within national jurisdiction. So also, to fight against cyber crimes is a complex task that requires multilateral and multi-stakeholder dialogues. It's really important to understand, I think, through research, the cyber threat landscape, so that the response is really designed in an evidence-based and an informed way. And I think it's also important then that once you are able to collect this evidence and identify an informed response, cyber policies somehow have to be human-centric. So, we do want to build more resilience, but the first step is really then to empower the internet users, as a number of speakers have said as well. And resilience can be seen as a function of capacity. And so internet resilience, I think it's a function of cyber capacity. As we've seen, during the COVID-19 outbreak and during the history of the internet infrastructure actually is a resilient network. Has been keep working under pressure and also under several attacks. It's still here, up and running, and it works every time better and better and faster. But so what actually we do need to build is the human resilience, because it seems that actually the human security at risk. And there is a problem of people's vulnerability. So I don't know if you, for instance, see developing countries, the landscape there is that the technology is outdated, it's not scrutinized, there are very low security standards in devices, in practice, in software, and there are really no measure to mitigate an advanced threat. So considering that the people can be the first line of defense against threat, is the most vulnerable, that we should try to protect and educate. And so cybersecurity policy, I think it should really aim at providing safe and security access and use of the internet by building this human resilience and protecting, of course, the human rights online. Just one final comment on this entity, that should somehow, I think, create trust in cyberspace. I think that, in the current landscape of tension, the UN, from my perspective, is recognized by a number of countries, and especially developing countries, as this kind of center of gravity. And I'm quoting here Dr. Mashabani from South Africa. Developing countries feel they can really, sit at the table of the UN. And so I believe that at that level, it's important to build global consensus on the governance of cyberspace. But what needs to change, from my perspective, is that this traditionally multilateral mechanism should encourage a wider participation. both from developing countries that, that are not always capacitated to meaningfully participate in this kind of debates, and of course to have also a broader dialogue with a number of non-state actors, including civil society organizations, the technical community, and others, so that all together we can define these principles, norms, and rules for a safe and secure cyberspace that at the end is truly inclusive and secure.
Thank you. Enrico, thank you for this. You have support from Cristiano Roy on the human-centered cybersecurity. And you mentioned human security in your first intervention, which is somehow forgotten in the international parlance, but it is an extremely interesting concept. I know it is supported a lot by Switzerland also because of the humanitarian aspect. Now, Enrico, we will start with you. By asking you to make a voluntary commitment. Be very careful, because Secretariat is taking good evidence whatever we promise, and hopefully next IGF will be in situ, therefore we have to deliver on that. 30 seconds for your voluntary commitment till the next IGF.
Yeah, so my voluntary commitment is to keep growing this need of data, of evidence, and of information for the development of evidence-based cyber policy making. So I'm committing myself to work more towards that. Okay,
Cengete, I'm sure you took this note. Thank you for that. Chris, what is your voluntary commitment?
I'm going to commit on behalf of both for myself and my organization to increase our regional focus in Africa and make our efforts more efficient and effective, and overall really raise the awareness and political level of cyber and cyber capacity building. We hope to hold a conference on this. It's still in the planning, so I can't announce it now, but I can announce what I just announced, and we'll do all we can to do that.
Great. Thank you, Chris. John, over to you.
Thanks very much. Well, we commit to work with our members and partners to ensure that access to internet and digital technology works on 3 layers of the digital ecosystem, on infrastructure, applications, and skills, to work with policymakers to improve their understanding of how ICTs actually work in practice, to co-create incentives for investment and innovation to develop, roll out, and maintain tools and solutions to secure meaningful access for underserved communities and vulnerable groups, co-design frameworks that enable connectivity based on light touch ICT policy and regulations, encouraging competition and enabling the entry of new players into the ICT ecosystem, and to mobilize our amazing network of 45 million companies, 12,000 chambers of commerce to get all this done.
Thank you, John. We will follow line by line next year when we meet at the IGF. Lata, what is commitment from your side? In addition to write a good blog post about trust bubble, it requires. This is commitment that I'm sort of imposing, because I think it's a great concept. Please go ahead. Joking now.
As a cyber peace warrior, as I like to call myself, my commitment is to continue my work on increasing international cooperation, more democratic internet governance frameworks, and on formulating cyber norms. We need to coordinate and consolidate our national, regional, plurilateral, and global efforts to achieve the goal of keeping cyberspace as safe and stable as we can. That's my commitment.
Thank you, Lata. Eugene, what you can promise till the next IGF for our community?
Cybersecurity trainings to UN cyber diplomats.
Oh, great. And we will develop
yes, and actually, I think that we'll do it a very funny way. Actually, we have a different trainings on cybersecurity. One of them is it's a table game. It's like a Monopoly game where there is a enterprise which is under cyber attack, and you are like CTO of the company of this enterprise. You have budget, you have options, you have time, and you must survive.
Wow, that's
so we can provide this kind of trainings for UN cyber diplomats, and it's really funny game. Thank you.
That's great to learn by with the fun by playing games, and I'm sure that I will follow up directly on this voluntary commitment, because it's so interesting. Thank you. Izumi, we are concluding commitment voluntary commitment list with you. What we can expect from your side, please.
Thank you. Before that, Eugene, definitely also, I would like to follow up on your offer as well. So from our perspectives, obviously in line with the Secretary General's agenda for disarmament and also Tunis agenda, I will continue to the best of my ability, my efforts to promote a global culture of cybersecurity. And that we do by continuing and further increasing our engagements with member states to help foster a culture of accountability, another key word, and also adherence and implementation of the norms that we talked about, rules and principles on responsible behavior in the use of ICTs. Also, I commit to further increase our engagement with other stakeholders, including businesses, industry, civil society, and tech people in general. And I would like to actually add a second bit of my commitment. It didn't come up today, but I would like to make a commitment to promoting the full and equal and meaningful participation of women in all decision-making processes related to this extremely important issue of cybersecurity. We already do have a shortage of cybersecurity capacity, in particular female capacities, and we need to do all sorts of different kinds of efforts to bring up new capacities and also making sure that women are involved in decision-making processes as well.
Thank you, Izumi, for great news, and thank you to all of our panelists for helping me to remain in good books of the IGF Secretariat, because we are finishing on time. And thank you for a great attendance. I think the questions were excellent. I tried to answer a few questions. I ignore one question by Vlada Radunovic because he works for my organization, although it was a great question, but he can tolerate me ignoring his question. It was really great discussion. We should discuss serious issues also with some fun. And Eugene, commitment to learn on cybersecurity via game is great. And I would like on this note to thank you for organizing it. Special thanks go to the IGF Secretariat, you and Dessa, all people who put a lot of efforts behind this session. And ECU or see you in person, hopefully next year for a discussion on commitment and for having some fun. For time being, I have to share with you virtually this drink, but next year we may develop whatever, peer-to-peer or beer-to-beer network and discuss serious issues in relaxing setting, which is in traditional diplomacy also a way to make a breakthroughs. Have a nice day, evening, late night for Lata. It's almost 1:30, and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Jovan, and thank you very much, panelists.
Thank you.
Thanks.